Hi all. Over the week, we have covered a lot of interesting topics, and the overall response and the feedbacks from all of you has been very, very encouraging. So we'll be closing this conference with today's sessions, and the theme for today is antibiotics. Antibiotics, as you all know, is a very, very important topic and a very, very commonly used drug by all doctors. But there are a lot of misconceptions and myths regarding antibiotic use. So over the day, we will be discussing certain key aspects in the practical use of antibiotics. So today's first session will be taken by Dr. Girish Kumar sir. Sir will be discussing about the topic, how to use antibiotics in ER, and also a quick outline about what are the newer antibiotics available in the pipeline. Over to Dr. Girish sir.
Welcome to AETLS, the Emergency Medicine Conference. Today we are discussing about antibiotic usage in emergency room, how to select antibiotic in various emergency medicine scenarios. We also will discuss some of the recent antibiotics or newer antibiotics in this topic. Let us discuss about selection of antibiotics in emergency room. When we have a patient who is having suspected infection, we can do following investigations. Complete blood count. If the patient is having bacterial infection, WBC counts are normally elevated. In viral infection, they are normal. But infections like enteric fever or leptospirosis, the counts can be still normal. Next investigation is urine routine. If the patient is having fever, chills, rigors, urine routine will be very helpful to diagnose urinary tract infection. And once we see pus cells in the urine, we have to send for culture. Culture may take 48 hours. Before that, we can start empirical therapy. Chest X-rays are very important in respiratory tract infections like pneumonia, LRTI, aspiration pneumonia and all. So that should be taken. Pus culture and gram stain is very important if there is a skin infection. Gram stain is one investigation which we can get very fast. So depending on the gram stain, we can initiate empirical antibiotic in skin infection, especially ulcers. Next important investigation which can be done in an infection is procalcitonin. We know that procalcitonin is one investigation which will be elevated in bacterial infection. If we have doubt regarding the etiology of the infection, like whether it is bacterial infection, viral infection or fungal infection, we can send procalcitonin. If procalcitonin is elevated, it is mostly a bacterial infection. If it is highly elevated, it can be sepsis also. Now we'll discuss about selection of antibiotics in lung infections. If the patient is fully stable and if the patient is ready for discharge, if the patient is having a lung infection like LRTI, azithromycin will be a very good choice because most of the patients who is having community acquired infections in the lung can be gram-positive organism. Azithromycin is a good choice. 500 mg once daily, 3 to 5 days is enough in this type of patients. But if the patient is having coexisting diseases like chronic diabetes, heart diseases or previous lung diseases like COPD or ILD, there is a chance of gram-negative organism in the lungs which can produce infections. So we have to go for little higher antibiotics like respiratory quinolones. Moxifloxacin is ideal choice here, 400 mg OD or levofloxacin 750 mg once daily for 5 to 7 days. Moxifloxacin and levofloxacin are respiratory quinolones, whereas ciprofloxacin, ofloxacin, norfloxacin they are also quinolones, but they act below diaphragm. Like they are drug of choice in infection below diaphragm. Above diaphragm, better select moxifloxacin or levofloxacin. Alternatives are amoxicillin clavulanic acid, that is augmentin, 625 mg TID, 5 to 7 days can be given. Some physicians add azithromycin also because it may cover atypical organism. Now, if the patient require ICU admissions, inpatient, non-ICU and ICU admission, like if the patient require admission and if the patient is going to ward, with a respiratory infection, levofloxacin will be an ideal choice. 750 milligram IV OD is an ideal choice. But remember, in elderly individuals, quinolones can produce seizure in some patients. If there is a seizure potential, like patient is having previous history of epilepsy, better not try this drug. We can go for alternative therapy like ampicillin, sulbactam, or ceftriaxone, or azithromycin with ertapenem. Like that, we can select alternative therapies. But in patients who have a respiratory infection, who are getting admitted in ward, moxifloxacin or levofloxacin IV will be good choice. If the patient is getting admitted to ICU, we need to give higher antibiotics like ceftriaxone. It's a third generation cephalosporin. You can give 2 gram IV OD, start from ER, and can be continued in ICU. Alternative drugs are ampicillin, sulbactam, again moxifloxacin, levofloxacin, IV can also be given. If the patient is having severe infection, meropenem may be required. 1 gram TID is a dose. But routine infections, meropenem is not a good choice because it's a higher antibiotic. It has to be preserved. So we should not use unnecessarily meropenem. We can go for levofloxacin or moxifloxacin. If you see the coverage of levofloxacin or moxifloxacin, it covers gram positive, it covers gram negative, it mostly covers atypical, it also covers anaerobes. So most of the infection, if the patient is not in sepsis, levofloxacin or moxifloxacin will be adequate. If the patient is in sepsis, we have to go for higher antibiotics like piperacillin, tazobactam or meropenem. Now, if we are suspecting pseudomonas infection, like patient is having chronic lung disease or patient is having severe diabetes, uncontrolled diabetes, chronic alcoholism and all, we have to suspect pseudomonas aeruginosa. If we are suspecting pseudomonas, better to go for dual antibiotic coverage, like we can give piperacillin, tazobactam with ciprofloxacin or levofloxacin. So always cover 2 drugs for pseudomonas if you are suspecting, or if the culture shows positive result for pseudomonas, we can give piperacillin, tazobactam plus ciprofloxacin or levofloxacin that can be continued. If we are suspecting MRSA, like patient is having bilateral pneumonia, a lot of cavitations are there, patient is coming from a different hospital, like admitted in that ICU for many days, or if the patient is on ventilator, we can suspect MRSA also. Or if culture shows MRSA, vancomycin is one good choice. But always remember, the patient is having hospital acquired infection, piperacillin, tazobactam, ciprofloxacin with vancomycin will be a good choice, because we have to cover for both pseudomonas and MRSA. Now, another important condition what we see in emergency room is diarrhea. Most of the diarrheas are non-infectious, like whether the patient has taken some food item which is creating gastritis, or sometimes it can be viral diarrhea, especially in children. They do not require any antibiotics there. So we have to give only supportive therapy in that type of patients. But if the patient is having fever or abdominal pain and diarrhea, there are different classes of drugs. One important drug is rifaximin. It's a non-absorbable antibiotic. It's mainly used in hepatic encephalopathy. It can also be used in travelers diarrhea. 400 milligram, 200 to 400 milligram TID is the dose can be given. In hepatic encephalopathy, slightly higher dose is required, 550 milligram BD is required. But in routine travelers diarrhea, 200 milligram TID is enough. If we are suspecting little higher infection, we can go for ciprofloxacin 500 milligram BD. We are avoiding ciprofloxacin in our country because ciprofloxacin, you know that it's a quinolone which can be used in tuberculosis. So we should try to avoid ciprofloxacin in wherever possible, and because it's a second line drug in tuberculosis. So rifaximin is a very good drug which can be given 200 milligram TID in travelers diarrhea or most of the gastro infections. But most of the physicians they give ciprofloxacin with tinidazole or ciprofloxacin with metronidazole. They are required only in giardiasis or amoebiasis. Most of the infections are bacterial infection. They do not require metronidazole or tinidazole. So we can give ciprofloxacin 500 milligram BD or rifaximin 200 milligram TID. That will be enough. If we are suspecting cholera, if the patient is having profuse diarrhea, rice water stools, then we can go for doxycycline 300 milligram single dose. Probiotics also can be given in patients who is having diarrhea because it helps in the like normal equilibrium of bacterial equilibrium of stomach. So probiotics can be given in patients who is having diarrhea. Now, next common infection in emergency room is infective endocarditis. Patient come with high degree fever, chills, rigors, no focus, cardiac murmurs. We can suspect infective endocarditis. They require echocardiogram to diagnose the lesion in the heart, or sometimes transesophageal echo also may be required. So after taking cultures, multiple cultures from different sites, we can start antibiotics. The most commonly used drugs in suspected infective endocarditis is, this is empirical treatment. This is not treatment after getting the culture. Penicillin IV 2 to 3 million units every 4th hourly plus gentamicin 1 milligram per kg body weight IV or ceftriaxone 2 gram per day IV can be given with gentamicin. These are the routine treatment for common infection, that is streptococcal infection. If we are suspecting penicillin resistant streptococci only, we have to add vancomycin 15 milligram per kg IV. So routinely used therapy is ceftriaxone with gentamicin or penicillin with gentamicin. We are suspecting enterococci, penicillin plus gentamicin. The same thing which is explained with streptococci. Staphylococci, vancomycin is the choice because when we are treating staphylococci, it can be methicillin sensitive or methicillin resistant. But before getting culture, we cannot tell whether it is MRSA or MSSA. So in a case like infective endocarditis, where the patient can deteriorate very fast, we use vancomycin. That is a drug of choice. ASEC organisms, if we are suspecting, ceftriaxone 2 gram IV OD is enough. But many physicians, as empirical therapy, they start ceftriaxone, gentamicin plus vancomycin. These are the combinations they use. But if we are suspecting only a community acquired infection, ceftriaxone with gentamicin will be enough. If we are only suspecting a staphylococcal infection like intravenous drug abuses and all, we have to use vancomycin. Now, we can see many patients who have chronic liver disease, ascites, come with infections. To prevent infection, that is spontaneous bacterial peritonitis in them, we can use norfloxacin prophylaxis. Norfloxacin can be given for a longer period to prevent infection in ascitic fluid. Or if the patient is admitted in emergency department due to some other reason, to prevent SBP, we can give rifaximin. We have already discussed 550 milligram BD. But if the patient is admitted with SBP, high degree fever or abdominal pain, on tapping the ascitic fluid, we get suspicion of SBP. We have to add a third generation cephalosporin like ceftriaxone or cefotaxime. 2 gram IV TID is a dose cefotaxime, ceftriaxone 2 gram IV BD. Or if the patient is sick or with high grade sepsis, we can go for piperacillin tazobactam 4.5 gram TID. So these are the routine antibiotics we can use in SBP. To prevent SBP, norfloxacin prophylaxis. In a patient who is admitted with chronic liver disease, to prevent SBP, we can give rifaximin. They are gut sterilizers. Then if the patient is admitted with SPP, then we have to start ceftriaxone or cefotaxime, because most of the time this SPP is produced by gram-negative organism, E. coli. So these drugs are very important. Third generation cephalosporins are very important. Now, when we get a patient who is having skin infection like cellulitis or infection over the foot, like diabetic foot and all, most of the time these organisms are gram positive. In an acute infection, most of the time the organism is gram positive, like streptococci or staphylococci. If it is chronic infection, then again gram negative organism can come into picture, and anaerobes also can develop there. But in acute infections, we have to suspect streptococcus and staphylococcus, and we have to cover staphylococcus. That is very important. When we are covering staphylococcus, that automatically covers streptococcus. But if we are giving a drug only for streptococcus, that may not cover staphylococcus. So normally when we are getting skin infections like cellulitis and all, we start flucloxacillin. That is a drug available in our country, flucloxacillin. 1 gram QID is the dose. 1 gram IV QID is the dose. So that can be started. Cefazolin is another drug which also can be used, but commonly available drug is flucloxacillin, 1 gram IV QID. That will cover MSSA, that is methicillin sensitive staphylococci. That will not cover MRSA. MRSA is resistant to methicillin, so it is resistant to flucloxacillin or cloxacillin. So we have to go for additional drugs like other drugs like vancomycin, linezolid, tigecycline, daptomycin and all. So normally if there is a skin infection, linezolid will be a good choice. But remember, when we are starting linezolid, look for platelet count. That can produce some amount of thrombocytopenia. So if a patient is already having thrombocytopenia, you have to go for alternative drugs. So linezolid is a good choice in staphylococcus infection if it is due to MRSA. We don't know whether it is MSSA or MRSA. Even then, linezolid can be started. If you are sure that it is only MSSA, if you have culture report, or if it is an acute infection, we are not suspecting MRSA. When the patient is going for multiple hospitals or multiple admissions histories are there, then we have to always think about MRSA. Otherwise, we can suspect MSSA in soft tissue infection, and we can start flucloxacillin. Otherwise, go for linezolid in MRSA suspicion. Now, whenever there is a severe skin infection, always add clindamycin, because these patients can go to toxic shock syndrome because of toxicity produced from the infection. So to stabilize these toxins, clindamycin will be a good choice. So always go for clindamycin along with flucloxacillin or MRSA treatment. Clindamycin dose is 300 to 450 milligram every 6 to 8 hours. Now, other important type of skin infections are diabetic foot. Diabetic foot also we have to suspect organism like gram-positive cocci, but chronic diabetic foot, it will become resistant organism or gram-negative organism. So we have to go for higher antibiotics in this type of conditions. So piperacillin tazobactam will be an ideal choice in this type of patients. So piperacillin tazobactam or clindamycin with ciprofloxacin, all these things are good choice. So remember, in an acute skin infection, it will be mostly gram positive. In a chronic infection, it can be gram positive or it can be gram negative, or anaerobic infections also possible. So flucloxacillin or linezolid alone will not be enough. We have to go for an antibiotic which can also cover gram negative infection like pseudomonas. So we can go for piperacillin tazobactam plus linezolid plus clindamycin. That will be ideal choice in severe infections. Now, another common infection in emergency room is urinary tract infections. We know that urinary tract infection, 90% of the time it will be gram negative organism like E. coli. So you can give Most of the urinary tract infections we can treat with norfloxacin 400 milligram BD for 5 to 7 days. If it is a female patient, 5 to 7 days will be enough. If it is a male patient, you need to give little more. You may have to give 14 to 15 days. If the patient is having complicated UTI, that is a structural deformities producing urinary tract infection or uncontrolled diabetes, then also we will have to give more than 2 weeks. So in patients who is having structural diseases, chronic diabetes, uncontrolled diabetes, immunocompromised status, male UTIs also we have to give for 14 days. In female simple cystitis or urinary tract infection, 7 days will be enough. Ideal drug is norfloxacin. If the patient is having more infections, we can go for ofloxacin. Ofloxacin 400 milligram OD is available, or 200 milligram BD also can be given. Trimethoprim combinations also can be given, that is Septran and DS can be given BD 7 days. Another important drug is oral fosfomycin sachet. They can be given 3 gram as a single dose in simple UTI, but in complicated UTI or chronic UTI or sick patients, we can give fosfomycin every alternate days. But they are very costly drugs. Pyelonephritis, we can go for higher antibiotics or a combination of antibiotic like ceftriaxone with gentamicin or fluoroquinolones IV or ceftriaxone alone can be started. So pyelonephritis, if the patient is sick, we have to give IV antibiotics. So there norfloxacin alone will not be sufficient. We have to give ceftriaxone, that is a third generation cephalosporin with aminoglycoside. In pregnant ladies, avoid fluoroquinolones. We can even go for drugs like amoxicillin clavulanic acid in pregnant ladies. Cefixime is a good choice. That's a third generation cephalosporin. 200 milligram BD can be given. Most of the patients who are not tolerating drugs like quinolones or who cannot be given quinolones because of seizure potential, pregnancy and all, cefixime is a good choice. Now another important condition which can come to emergency room is meningitis, infection of meninges. Whenever we are seeing a meningitis case, we have to always take proper history. MRI may be required, LP may be required in this type of patients. Before starting antibiotic, we have to give dexamethasone. So after giving dexamethasone, we can start the antibiotic. The commonly used antibiotic in empirical therapies, we have to cover both gram positive and gram negative organism when we are starting empirical therapy. So we can give penicillin with ceftriaxone. Penicillin mostly covers gram positive organism which can produce meningitis. Ceftriaxone covers gram negative organism also. The dose of ceftriaxone will be higher. 2 gram IV BD or TID may be required. Recent guidelines say vancomycin can be given along with ceftriaxone. Vancomycin with ceftriaxone instead of penicillin with ceftriaxone. Vancomycin with ceftriaxone can be given. If the patient is having extremes of age like very young child or very elderly individual, we have to suspect listeria and we can add ampicillin. Ampicillin 2 gram IV TID or QID can be started in this type of patients. So in a patient who is having meningitis, we have to give dexamethasone. After half an hour, we can start antibiotic. We have to give gram positive coverage and gram negative coverage. Penicillin or vancomycin with ceftriaxone will be a good choice. If the patient is having extremes of age like young child, very young child or elderly individual, add ampicillin. So 2 gram IV QID can be started. If the patient is very sick, meropenem can be started. Meropenem dose is 2 gram IV TID. Routine dose is 1 gram IV TID. In meningitis, the dose is very high, 2 gram IV TID. So these are empirical therapies. After getting proper culture report, we can de-escalate or escalate the antibiotics. Now, febrile neutropenia is another condition where the patient will have high degree fever and they already have neutropenia due to various reasons. It can be due to an infection, or it can be due to malignancy, or it can be due to a drug started for malignancy and bone marrow suppression. So, patient can have very low neutrophil count and infections. In this type of patients, we have to cover pseudomonas. That is very important. Anti-pseudomonal drug like piperacillin tazobactam. But whenever we have a suspected pseudomonas infection or a confirmed pseudomonas infection, always try to give dual protection. Give piperacillin tazobactam with a fluoroquinolones with any aminoglycoside can be started. So whenever patient is having febrile neutropenia, we have to cover pseudomonas. So patient can have so many different infection, but always try to cover pseudomonas in this type of patients. If the patient is very sick, piperacillin tazobactam with a quinolones or aminoglycoside will be the choice of antibiotic. Now let us discuss about some of the newer antibiotics approved by FDA. Ceftazidime avibactam is a third generation cephalosporin with combination with avibactam, that's a non-beta lactamase inhibitor. It is indicated in complicated UTIs, pyelonephritis, complicated intra-abdominal infections, hospital-acquired pneumonia. The dose is 2.5 gram 8th hourly. It should be infused over 2 hours. It contains 2 gram ceftazidime and 0.5 gram avibactam. Another combination is meropenem with vabrobactam. Meropenem is a higher antibiotic. This combination can be given in carbapenem resistant enterobacterias and Klebsiella. The dose is 4 gram, that is meropenem 2 gram with vabrobactam 8th hourly. It should be given as an infusion, 4-hour infusion, TID, that is a dose. Complicated UTIs, pyelonephritis, and even intra-abdominal infections, it can be used. Another combination is imipenem rilebactam. Same like the previous drug. It's active against ESBLs, Klebsiella, AMC. This type of resistant organisms, we can use this drug. So it is useful in even Pseudomonas aeruginosa. Another combination is ceftazolizine and tazobactam. It is also mainly used in intra-abdominal infections, urinary tract infections, complicated ventilator-associated or hospital-acquired pneumonias. 1.5 gram IV 8th hourly is the dose. Another newer drug is cefdinirocol. It's a cephalosporin. It is active against carbapenem resistant MDR gram negative bacilli. It is mainly useful in complicated UTIs, pyelonephritis, and it can be used against E. coli, Klebsiella, Protease, Pseudomonas, Enterobacter. All gram negative MDR organism, this drug can be used. So now we have discussed about how to select an antibiotic in emergency room, and we also discussed some of the newer antibiotics. Thank you.
That was surely a very, very enriching session by Dr. Girish Kumar sir. We will move on to the second talk for the day. This is again a very, very important topic, and the topic is titled Combating Antibiotic Resistance. This talk is being taken by Dr. Deepu TS, who is an associate professor in the Department of General Medicine with focus on Division of Infectious Diseases. Over to Dr. Deepu.
Now we will deal with the topic of antimicrobial resistance. So every era had its challenges as well as the good fortunes. So the photo obviously show the challenge which the world had to face during the period of World War II, where America has nuked Japan. But all was not that dark, and there were greeneries or there were bright times even in that era. So this is one moment where Alexander Fleming has detected penicillin, and which lead on to the saving of the hundreds of thousands of soldiers and other people during the period of World War II and the subsequent years. So it was called as a wonder drug during that period. And if we look at the chronology of the antibiotics, so the first antibiotics identified close to the 1930s, and then after 1940s there was a boom of the antibiotic classes, and from 1940s to 1990s, so many antibiotics and so many classes of antibiotics has been produced by the scientific world. But by 2000, 2010, 2020, barely any antibiotic started coming to the market. And right now we have a discovery void of antibiotics. So the era of antibiotics can be classified into three. In the pre-antibiotic era, even the minor injuries carries the potential to start the beginning of an end, which means even the minor injuries like a small cut injury, gunshot injury, or even a common streptococcal throat infection always had the potential or possibility to cause a bacterial sepsis and death. Then begin the golden era of antibiotics, where all these mortalities has been we were able to curb all this mortality, and the death related to sepsis was almost practically negligible. And we have moved on from that era, and currently we are in the era of MDR and XDR pathogens. And not only that, with all these pathogens, we are looking at a dried pipeline of novel antibiotics. So currently we are almost going back to the pre-antibiotic era, of course, in a different way. So this topic gets the relevance because of the issue which we are facing at this point of time. So in order to better understand the crisis which we are really going to face, this antibiotic pyramid will help us. So from treating the minor injuries, we leapfrog to a great extent. So initially we started treating wound infections and other common infections like urinary infection, pneumonia, blood infection. Soon we started treating complicated cases like complicated deliveries, preterm babies who almost had a negligible chance of survival. But with the use of antibiotic, they started surviving. We didn't stop there, and we started hip replacement, knee replacement, organ transplantation, and cancer treatment. Now we know even cancer treatment where we knocked out practically all neutrophils. With zero neutrophils, the patients are surviving the sepsis. So that kind of advancement in science and therapy is practically impossible without the shoulders of the antibiotics. So it is practically well to say that the current healthcare system stands on the shoulders of the antibiotics. So from the narrative, we should try to understand the role of antibiotics in maintaining the healthcare system in the current way. So what are the staring facts of antimicrobial resistance? The life-saving drugs are no more effective. Not many life-saving drugs are in the pipeline, and the bacteria is evolving and the resistance is developing at a rapid rate. So some of us will obviously think, why is pharma companies are not interested in developing antibiotics? If they have developed the antibiotics in that golden era, why are they not doing the same where there is a lot of MDR and XDR organisms? So this chart will help us understand the same. So we can see in 1943, penicillin use became very common, and in 1945, 2 years down the line, the resistance has been identified. Vancomycin identified in 1972, 16 years down the line, in 88, resistance started becoming common. Imipenem identified in 1985, and 13 years down the line, resistance we started noticing resistance. Daptomycin identified in 2003, and resistance happened in 2004. So which means all antibiotics comes with an expiry period. So if a pharma company is investing heavily in producing an antibiotic, then if unless we have that culture of using the antibiotics appropriately, we are obviously looking at this fate of resistance. And a rapid resistance means there is a lesser shelf life for the antibiotic, and there is barely any margin for the pharma companies to invest in such a losing game. So this is the financial aspect of the antibiotic production, which they are considering, and because of which they are not heavily investing in the same. What is the unique problem of India and LMICs, that is the lower middle income countries, as far as the antibiotic resistance is concerned? One is, of course, our population. We have a massive population, and the possibility of developing resistance is high just because of the sheer volume. And there is barely any regulatory guidelines to prevent the to monitor the antibiotic prescription practices. And of course, there is lack of development on us in us, because of obviously the antibiotics has been developed in the Western world, and they have seen in the golden era how the misuse and abuse of antibiotics resulted in the resistance, because of which they know that they had to come up with certain strategies to prevent the development of the resistance. But whereas we always remained as a consumers, and we are still thinking that if we are using this antibiotics, some other antibiotics will come. So the lack of honest in countries like India and LMIC is definitely a unique problem. So just to give you an idea how the Western world controlled the antibiotic prescriptions, recently one of our administrators traveled to Netherlands, and currently she is in Netherlands. So her son-in-law had a chicken pox followed by a lower respiratory infection, and they consulted a GP. They asked for antibiotics, but then there was no way he prescribed antibiotics. He told that this is a chicken pox, which is a viral infection, and some mild cough is part of the viral infection. And then they argued, saying that if it is in India, we will give antibiotics, telling that these antibiotics will help in preventing the secondary infection, not only the cutaneous, even the pneumonias. In this particular patient, they had cough, but then they told, whatever pneumonia you are seeing is part of the viral illness only, and there is it will subside as the chickenpox subside. And they have refused to give antibiotics. They didn't budge a bit. So this is how the Western world tightens the grip. All, one of my mentor, she's now moved to United States. So she recently told me a story. She prescribed ceftriaxone for a patient who had streptococcus in the blood. But of course, after 2 days, the patient still continued to spike fever. In such a setting, she thought that anyway, ceftriaxone is kind of not working. So why should I not escalate to piperacillin tazobactam? And she escalated the antibiotic to piperacillin tazobactam. So the antimicrobial stewardship team of that particular institute, they had a conversation with my mentor, and they told that anyway we have a streptococcus, and from the culture and sensitivity report we know that the streptococcus is sensitive to ceftriaxone. In such setting, there is no need to escalate to piperacillin tazobactam, and they politely requested her to de-escalate back to ceftriaxone. So she told that of course, even though the antibiotic is sensitive, the patient is clinically not improving. To that argument, they humbly told that if it is not responding to ceftriaxone, it is unlikely to respond to piperacillin tazobactam, and you might have to look for alternative reasons for the fever. After one more day, she took the chest X-ray, which showed some early effusion in the X-ray. So she went with a CT of the chest, which showed an effusion. She aspirated and found that it was an empyema. So she did a pigtail aspiration. She put a pigtail and aspirated the empyema fluid, following which the fever subsided. So again, this underscores that it is not that once a clinical syndrome is not improving, we have to keep on escalating the antibiotics. There might be 100 other reasons for the fever, for the non-resolving fever. So you need to be on the lookout for those and to rectify that. In this particular case, it was about source control. And why are we so much worried about the resistance? Because we need to know that the resistance once developed will not be limited to one part of the world. In this particular picture, you can see that this is the picture where New Delhi metalloproteinase, a carbapenemase, which has been initially detected in India, later spread to all other part of the globe. So we are in such an era where the travel, there is practically no travel restriction. Of course, now because of the COVID times, we are facing some travel restrictions. Otherwise, it was a free world and the boundaries were more apparent than real. And in such a situation, the antibiotic resistance, if not curbed, it will spread all across the globe. So, antimicrobial resistance occurs when bacteria, viruses, fungi, and parasites change over time and no longer respond to medicines, making infections harder to treat and increasing the risk of disease spread, severe illness, and death. This is more like a definition of antibiotic resistance. We are little slow to come to the definition, but then nevertheless we have to tell it. How bacteria acquire resistance? So now that is the question. Bacteria have two pathways to acquire resistance. One is the mutations, and these mutations provide resistance by, and alternatively, they can receive resistance genes from other bacteria nearby. This process is called horizontal gene transfer. And of course, the Darwinian principles of natural selection will be applicable even for the bacteria. In case if we are keep on giving antibiotics, only the mutant strain will get selected, and over a period of time, all the bacteria in that particular area or particular human gut of particular individual will be more of a resistant in nature than the classical gut biome which we are expecting. So here we can see how the natural selection is taking place. So there are bacteria, whatever yellow things which you are seeing is are bacteria, and we can only see two dots, which are the resistant bacteria. We are administering antibiotics, and there is a selection pressure. Only the resistant bacteria can multiply, and over a period of time, you can see the whole field or whole area is full of resistant bacteria. So this natural selection will happen. Continuing to use antibiotics, this is kind of an inevitable endpoint. And now the question which comes to our mind is, how is bacteria resisting all these newer antibiotics? As far as bacteria are concerned, there are two means for bacteria to withstand the effect of an antibiotic. One is to stop the antibiotic from reaching its target at a high enough concentration to kill the bacterial cell, for which they produces various efflux pumps which pumps out the antibiotics and inactivating enzymes which degrades the antibiotics. Also, they can produce alternative enzymes so that the antibiotic will bind to the alternative enzymes. The second is by modifying the target on which the antibiotic acts. So the target alteration is the second main mechanism. So the antibiotics will no more able to bind to that particular area for the development of its effect. So if a particular bacteria is developing antibiotic resistance, so if I am taking antibiotics or if I am abusing antibiotics and if I am developing antibiotic resistance, so why should you be worried? Why it should be my headache? We always, as humans, we will always have that kind of thought process. So we need to understand that, the antibiotics, a resistant antibiotic, we have seen that, how an antibiotic resistance spreads from one part to another. That is the geographical spread. When considering the resistant bacteria, how it can spread the resistant gene from one bacteria to another is also something which we need to understand. So the antibiotic resistance will be usually present in the gene. For in this particular, in the first scenario, you can see that the resistance gene, which is carried by the plasmid, can be transferred from one bacteria to the other by the mechanism called conjugation, where there will be a cell membrane attachment from one bacteria to the another, and using this pipeline, the plasmid gene will be transferred from the first bacteria to the newer bacteria. Actually, a replica of the plasmid is getting transmitted to the second bacteria. So you can see in the last figure, both the old bacteria as well as the new bacteria is having a resistant plasmids. So from this picture, we can understand that once the resistance mechanism starts somewhere, even without the continued presence of the antibiotic, the resistance can spread from one bacteria to the other. Another mechanism is the transduction. I'm not going into the detail of the transduction, but in this transduction mechanism, it is the bacteriophage which is carrying the DNA and transferring from one bacteria to the another. And third is the transformation, where bacteria can directly take up resistance gene from its environment. So these are few examples of transfer of antibiotic resistance from across the bacterial species. Coming to the multi-drug resistant bacteria. So accumulation of these resistance genes often take place on small DNA pieces called plasmids that can be transferred between bacteria. Single resistance mechanisms give resistance to more than one antibiotic. That is another tricky situation which we need to be aware of. And the peculiarity of MDR bacteria is that they are hard to treat, facilitates spread of antibiotic resistance, they are on the rise, and they are plasmid mediated. So these are some things which we need to remember about the MDR organisms and their resistance. So spread of resistant bacteria. So in the previous figure, we have described how NDM, New Delhi metalloprotein, is a carbapenemase enzyme which started in the New Delhi, how it spread all across the globe. So the reasons, as I mentioned, it is due to the international traveling and trade. The processed food crosses the boundaries. There is a person-to-person transmission, direct contact, or from the surface. And then healthcare facility, animal husbandry, water, all these will act as a source for the spread of resistant bacteria. Now the question is, how did we end up here? Where do resistance genes come from? So there is no second thought about it. It is basically the antibiotics are here to use, but we misused and abused the antibiotics, because of which right now we are having these resistance genes in the bacteria. Why, when I tell that there is abuse and misuse, is that even in our COVID times, if we are carefully looking at the data of the hospitals, we can see that there is so much misuse of antibiotics for COVID infections. Essentially, we know that COVID is a viral infection, but then 70% of hospitalized patients are getting some or other forms of antibiotics. So even in OPD settings, for simple viral infections and flu, we are giving oral antibiotics. So it is basically an antibiotic abuse in the healthcare facility. But we have to understand that healthcare facility antibiotic use is only a tip of the iceberg. Then there is a lot of antibiotic consumption in animal husbandry. In animal husbandry, we are giving antibiotics basically to augment the growth of the animals, as well as to prevent the infection. And that is more in like a hope rather than actually but also they are using it as a food additive. And in third, agriculture, there is a spraying of antibiotic to prevent infections and loss of crop. So the whole environment is contaminated with these resistant bugs. And we already discussed that once there is an environmental contamination, there will be resistant bacteria, and the resistant bacteria can always transfer the gene. So there is a collective reason for the current situation which we are facing. Another example which I want to tell to put forth the point that antibiotic use in agriculture and animal husbandry is fostering resistance in humans. The example is the classical resistance of colistin. So initially, colistin was one antibiotic which was commonly used, but after a short span of time, because of its toxicity and the availability of better antibiotics, it soon fall out of the wagon. And the colistin being very cheap and it's no more being used, it found its place in the animal husbandry as well as in the agriculture, where the colistin was used in massive amount. And now what is happening is that the when we eat the chicken, the colistin resistant bug, if it is there, it will contaminate the human gut as well. So currently we are having that chain of transmission. And the sad fact is that right now, in the era of MDR and XDR organism, colistin is one antibiotic we are really looking forward to. But then by the time we we came back to colistin, it's already misused, abused in such a way that we just cannot use colistin in the current times. So we already discussed why there is so few antibiotics in development. The reason is obviously more than the financial and regulatory hurdles. There is scientific difficulties in coming up with a new molecule. And of course, since once the antibiotic production, once there is no financial backup, all the scientific minds will start focusing on other viable things, and the scientific expertise will come down, and this will also create a vicious cycle. So people who has the ability to know how also will come down, and this also is an add-on reason for the lesser development of antibiotics during this time. So how will you manage the antibiotic? The antibiotic resistance problems cannot be solved, but only can be managed. So alternative ways to prevent and treat bacterial infections we have to think, and the scientific world is putting a lot of effort in this front. Bacteriophages and peptides are the newer modalities which we are banking on. The problem of antibiotic resistance cannot be solved by the discovery of new antibiotics alone, as we already discussed that any antibiotics will get resistance in some time. So whole culture of antibiotic use will have to be changed. So should eye care, healthcare associated infections is a major threat. So risk for not only for individuals, but it is also for the society. There will be treatment failure, there will be economic losses, resistant bacteria in normal flora, there is additional infections, and with resistant infections, we have to give more antibiotic, and there will be adverse drug reactions. With additional infections, I mean, if you are giving broad spectrum antibiotic, then there is always the possibility of getting super infections with organisms like Clostridium difficile. So of course, if we don't care, then the imminent end is anyone's guess. Okay, if that is the case, what can I do as an individual, as a healthcare professional? So we need to develop a plan for antimicrobial resistance. So one thing which we all need to do is that we need to start measuring. Unless we have metrics, there is no way to improve. You need to have the data so that you can work on the same, and then you can improve yourself. So metrics is something which we all need to have. So review the existing data, collect new data, share the data so that everyone can see it and everyone can act on it. Then feed data to the surveillance systems. So again, the second thing is prevent infection, infection control practices, and which include not only good clinical practices, but also the educational activities. Third is the promote rational use of the antibiotics. For using antibiotics rationally, we have we need to have antibiotic guidelines and antibiograms. So what can I do? Of course, we told about the metrics. So in this scenario, to give you a practical view of what a person or individual or an institution can do. I will just briefly mention what Amrita Institute of Medical Sciences has done to combat the antimicrobial resistance. So we started the antibiotic stewardship program back in 2013. We started with a small form where the clinicians are asked to write a justification while giving reserve antibiotics. That's all. So there was no hindrances. We didn't pose any hindrances. We just asked them to write this justification form. So this acted as a small step like this will go a long way. And we started getting all this data, and then we understood that from the prescriptions, we understood that there is a lot of antibiotic overuse. So we set up a process and we reviewed the consumption data of preceding 3 years of antibiograms and determined the list of reserve antibiotics. And we set up a structure of antimicrobial stewardship team, which include the ID physician, microbiologist, infection control professional, ID clinical pharmacist, IT specialist, a hospital epidemiologist, and everything is coordinated by administrative champion. So with the setup of antibiotic stewardship team, we have created a form, and we enlisted the reserve antibiotics, and our team monitored the appropriateness of antibiotic use based on the 5R. So whenever a reserve antibiotic has been used, we started checking whether this 5R is practiced in that particular prescription. That is the right duration, whether the antibiotic is prescribed for right indication, in right frequency, right dose, and is it the right drug. So these 5Rs, we started monitoring these 5Rs, and in our stewardship meeting, we started monitoring these 5Rs, and based on the inappropriateness which we saw, we started giving feedback to the clinicians. And it was a polite feedback, it was a written feedback, and we used to tell them that because of this and this reason, this antibiotic is not justified. For example, classically, during the initial time, this was a very common prescription we used to see. For example, we used to see the prescription of Magnex plus Metrogyl or Piptas plus clindamycin. So we used to tell that Piptas and Magnex has as adequate coverage, as adequate anaerobic coverage as Metrogyl or clindamycin, so that there is no need to combine these two antibiotics. So, like those were our low hanging fruits, double anaerobic coverage. So we used to target that. So in February 2016, Jan 2016, you can see we have suggested and the appropriateness started slowly going up. It was 56%, but then next year it fell down to 47%. Of course, there will be resistance, but we have to be persistent. And 2018, 2019, our appropriateness prescription in our institute increased to 80%, and thereon the appropriateness, there's a steady increase in the appropriateness, and in 2021 we are seeing a appropriateness rate of up till 90%. So this was the crossing the 90% was our goal when we started antimicrobial stewardship program. So I have to say that we are happy that we crossed that 90% mark of appropriateness. Of course, some of you will be thinking that you did a good job of appropriateness. So what does that really mean? Whether that means that the resistance pattern which you have seen in your hospital taken a backward step. So here you can see the carbapenem susceptibility pattern over the years from 2017 to 2018. So here you can see all the bacteria, E. coli, Klebsiella, Acinetobacter, Pseudomonas, Enterobacter, Burkholderia, all these bacteria were more sensitive to the antibiotics in the 2018 period. Of course, it was not statistically significant sensitivity, but the trend is kind of very common. So when we start the monitoring, monitoring for the appropriateness of antibiotic, the antibiotic consumption has come down, thereby resulting in a more sensitive more sensitive bacteria as a group in that particular period. This is the polymyxin epidemiology data from our institute. where you can see that there was a 45% reduction in polymyxin prescriptions over the years. And the top line, that is the blue line, shows that with the reduction in the polymyxin prescriptions, and there was a favorable effects on the appropriateness of prescriptions and a subsequent mortality benefit. So when there is a reduction in polymyxin prescription, whatever prescription we had given was for right indication, and all the 5 Rs were satisfied, because of which there was a favorable outcome in terms of mortality. So coming to my last slide, we have to, so the story which I have just told is the success story of the antimicrobial stewardship program of our institute. So wherever you are, in whichever institute you are planning to work, you can be part of the antimicrobial stewardship team, or if not, you can be part of the good clinical, good prescription practice, so that you can directly or indirectly contribute to reduction in the resistance in your institute. So we need to understand that the right now the focus is in the concept of One Health. So One Health is an approach that recognizes that the health of people is closely connected to the health of animals and our shared environment. So it is a broader concept where they are forcing us to think that we are part of the ecosystem, and there is animals, and there is environment, and there's us, the humans. So we need to have a 360-degree view, and we need to understand that the antibiotic usage in all these 3 situations we need to manage as a whole to tackle the antimicrobial resistance problem for in the coming future. So with these words, I am winding up my section, thanking you for your patient listening.
Thank you, Dr. Deepu. So those are the 2 sessions for the day. Now we will be moving on to the live, that is the YouTube live for the panel discussion. See you on the other side. So let us move on to YouTube live.